Jamarcus was just trying to mop the floor when the CEO screamed, "Security! He's stealing our software." But Jamarcus built that code, line by line, years ago. Now, cameras are rolling, and the truth can't stay buried. But what's hidden in the server room will flip the entire boardroom upside down. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The morning skyline over Manhattan shimmered gold, the sun reflecting off steel and glass towers like a city made of coins. Beneath it, the Hilton Grand Pavilion buzzed with camera crews, foreign delegates, and executives in suits sharp enough to slice air. This wasn't just any conference. It was the Global Oil Tech Summit, an event years in the making, billions in oil reserves, cutting-edge AI patents, and a once-in-a-lifetime chance to fuse two global empires, Silicon Valley and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Inside the hotel's grand ballroom, stagehands adjusted lights, while assistants rehearsed names, too foreign for their tongues. The air smelled of burnt coffee and nerves. Near the back, a small army of custodians cleaned the marble floors until they gleamed like runways. Among them, Jamarcus Owens moved silently with his mop, every stroke precise, every motion practiced, not because he loved the job, but because invisibility had become his armor. Above him, a banner read, "Innovation without borders." Irony, it seemed, had a budget this year. On the other side of the ballroom, Preston Vale, tech mogul, media darling, and CEO of one of the fastest-growing AI firms in the world, paced like a lion in $1,000 loafers. Tall, photogenic, and ruthlessly polished, Preston was the kind of man who had learned early that charm could be a weapon, and power could be sterilized with a smile. He wasn't nervous. He was livid. "Where the hell is the interpreter?" he hissed into his Bluetooth headset. From the other end, his assistant stammered. "There was a family emergency, sir. Her child." "I don't care if the kid was abducted by aliens. We've got $1 trillion deal on the line." Preston turned sharply, eyes scanning the room. Somewhere in the back, Jamarcus noticed the motion and instinctively looked down, gripping the mop like a prayer. "Stay invisible." That's what the white security supervisor had barked at him earlier. "Big money in the house, so no wandering. Stay where you're told." Preston sighed and muttered, "We'll wing it. I'll use slides." Tech speaks louder than words. He believed that algorithms didn't need translators, that apps could bridge gaps. Diplomacy never could. He didn't understand culture. He understood coding. Reporters flooded the front entrance, shouting over one another. Flashbulbs erupted as the Saudi delegation arrived in tailored tobes, silent and regal, their expressions unreadable behind designer sunglasses. The camera shutters were a frenzy of light and sound. The moment had arrived. Preston strode forward, arms outstretched. "Gentlemen," he boomed. The delegation nodded politely, but offered no handshakes. Behind the dignitaries, two royal advisors whispered urgently. The group paused at the entrance, their translator nowhere in sight. They scanned the room with growing concern. Jamarcus, still near the ballroom doors, swept slowly, quietly, but his ears caught every syllable. "Is this the man?" one advisor asked in Arabic. "Where is our interpreter? This is disrespectful." "They were warned," another said grimly. "We flew 8,000 miles, and they greet us like laborers." Jamarcus's hand froze mid-sweep. His pulse surged. He knew that dialect, Riyadi-accented Arabic, sharp, clipped, noble in tone. No one else understood them. And that was the problem. Preston, still unaware of the crisis he'd triggered, launched into his introduction. "Welcome, esteemed guests, to what I believe is the dawn of a new empire." Silence met his speech. The Saudis exchanged looks, their brows furrowed. Without interpretation, Preston's words were meaningless. Noise. A man talking at two, his guests. One advisor leaned in to whisper, and another shook his head. From across the room, a white manager raced to the audio booth, scrambling for a last-minute solution. A young intern nearly tripped over a wire trying to download Google Translate. Another began typing frantically into ChatGPT. The embarrassment grew like a stain, spreading across velvet. "They do not value us," the lead advisor said softly in Arabic. Jamarcus's fingers clenched around the mop. His mind raced. The summit, the translation, the deal, the centuries-old weight of being unheard and undervalued. He had been taught that silence was safety, but in that moment, Silence was betrayal. The Saudis rose, one by one, graceful, deliberate. Jamarcus cleared his throat. No one heard it. He stepped forward. Just 2 steps. Quiet, respectful. Eyes low, not challenging. "Sir," he said softly. Preston didn't turn. "Sir," Jamarcus repeated, louder now. Several heads turned. A few attendees frowned. "A janitor speaking at an international summit? What is it?" Preston barked, without looking. Jamarcus's voice didn't shake. "I can translate." The room stopped. A strange stillness fell, like the moment before a lightning strike. Preston slowly turned. His eyes scanned Jamarcus from top to boots. Faded work uniform, ID badge hanging limp, rubber gloves in his back pocket. "You?" he sneered. "You're a janitor." Jamarcus nodded once. "And a fluent Arabic speaker." The Saudis perked up. One of the younger advisors leaned forward, curiosity blooming in his gaze. "Say something," he said in Arabic. Jamarcus responded. Fluently, perfectly. Not just the words, the tone, the inflection, the respect. He quoted a proverb about trust being born in silence, not applause. A pause. Then nods. The Saudis sat back down. Preston's jaw clenched. Every camera in the room turned. Reporters began whispering. Phones lifted. "Fine," Preston muttered. "Fine. Do your thing." Jamarcus approached the podium, not as a janitor, not as an employee, but as a bridge, the very thing the summit claimed to celebrate, yet had nearly buried under arrogance. He stood beside Preston, as the billionaire resumed his speech. Every sentence Preston spoke was echoed by Jamarcus in flawless Arabic, but what Jamarcus conveyed was more than words. He translated tone, context, cultural humility. Where Preston boasted, Jamarcus softened. Where Preston bragged about AI taking over human error, Jamarcus reworded to stress collaboration and innovation. The Saudis listened, engaged, leaned in. Behind the cameras, Preston's PR manager clenched her pen. Her job had just been saved, not by a CEO, but by a black janitor with a mop leaning against the wall. The speech ended. Polite applause echoed. But the Saudis weren't clapping for Preston. They looked to Jamarcus, nodded at him, spoke to him directly. And then something shifted. Preston, already red-faced, forced a tight smile. "Why don't we take a quick break?" he said. As the room relaxed and dispersed for coffee, Preston leaned close to Jamarcus, his voice a whisper of disdain. "You ever speak over me again," he said, "and I'll have you mopping floors in Cuba." But Jamarcus didn't flinch. He didn't respond. He just watched. And he noticed something Preston hadn't. The Saudis were no longer speaking to any of the executives. They were all approaching Jamarcus. One of the Saudi advisors gently tapped Jamarcus's arm and asked, in Arabic, "Are you free for a private conversation this afternoon?" The ballroom buzzed in a low hum of confusion and awe. Jamarcus still stood near the podium, hands folded calmly, eyes lowered in cultural deference, not submission. Around him, white executives exchanged nervous glances. Interns whispered to each other in disbelief. The Saudi delegation remained seated now, their arms uncrossed, their expressions no longer hardened with offense, but softened with curiosity. The silence held, fragile as glass. Preston Vale clapped slowly, masking resentment behind a tight smile. "Well then," he chuckled dryly, "turns out innovation shows up in the most unexpected forms." Some of the audience laughed politely. Most didn't. The room had witnessed something raw, something real. For a fleeting moment, the thin veil of racial hierarchy had torn, and the man with the mop had become the man who saved the day. But beneath Preston's cologne and expensive confidence, something curdled. His public persona was practiced, but his ego fragile, and nothing threatened it more than being upstaged, especially by a black janitor. On the crumbling edge of East Grand Boulevard, the rhythm of Detroit was not found in wealth, but in willpower. A teenage Jamarcus Owens sat cross-legged on a torn mattress, earbuds in, eyes glued to the cracked screen of a second-hand tablet. Arabic script scrolled across the display as a soft voice enunciated syllables with clarity. Alif Ba. His mother, Aliyah Owens, passed the doorway holding a laundry basket. She paused, tilting her head. "Ain't no one teaching you that in school," she said gently. "I'm teaching myself," Jamarcus said without looking up. "Why?" He finally glanced at her, eyes gleaming with quiet fire. "Because the world ain't gonna teach me how to survive. I gotta learn it myself. His journey into Arabic had started after a school field trip to a mosque. He'd been captivated not by the religion, but by the rhythm, the elegance of the language, its poetry. Every night since, he downloaded free resources, practiced pronunciations, and shadowed mosque elders in his neighborhood who humored him with short conversations after evening prayer. By the time he turned 17, Jamarcus could hold debates in Arabic and win them. He graduated valedictorian from Dunbar High, a local miracle in a city scarred by poverty and neglect. His college application to Princeton had a flawless GPA, top SATs, and a personal essay about building cross-cultural tech tools using language as a bridge. But acceptance never came. Instead, a suspension for a disciplinary incident, a racial misunderstanding, where a white classmate accused him of making aggressive gestures during a student debate, was flagged in his file. It was enough. The Ivy League rejected him with a form letter. Later, he overheard a counselor say, "He's brilliant, but too intense. Not Ivy material." That summer, he applied for internships at 12 major tech firms. Only one replied, and then rescinded their offer once they reviewed conduct history. Back in the present, Jamarcus was no longer the hopeful teen reading Quranic verse on a cracked tablet. He was the man with calloused hands, dust on his shoes, and a badge that read, "Maintenance Staff." But his mind was sharp, his skills intact, and now the world had heard him. He had translated Preston's entire speech with poetic precision. Where Preston pitched AI as the ultimate problem solver, Jamarcus framed it in Arabic as the tool that learns humility. When Preston referenced quarterly profits, Jamarcus balanced it with appeals to legacy and shared futures. The Saudis were not just appeased, they were impressed. As the delegation rose to stretch during the break, one of the royal advisors, a silver-bearded man with a sapphire ring, approached Jamarcus. "You learned our tongue with such grace," he said, his English soft and accented. "Where did you study?" Jamarcus hesitated. "Detroit," he said. "Mostly YouTube." The advisor smiled, intrigued. "And now you work here?" "A strange fate," the man replied. "But perhaps fate writes in languages we haven't yet learned." Preston lingered close enough to hear. He flashed his practiced smile and slid between them. The advisor patted Jamarcus on the shoulder and said, "In Arabic, real inclusion does not wear uniforms to remain invisible." Later, in the conference center's staff lounge, Jamarcus sat alone on a folding chair, sipping lukewarm coffee from a paper cup. The adrenaline had faded. The weight returned. He wasn't supposed to speak. He wasn't supposed to be seen. He remembered his mother's words from childhood. "In this world, baby, being smart while black is dangerous, but being silent while smart. That's how they keep us cleaning up their mess." The door creaked open. Preston stepped inside, hands tucked into his blazer pockets. "Well," he said casually, "you certainly stirred the pot today." Jamarcus looked up. "I just helped." "Helped?" Preston's tone turned cool. "You almost hijacked the meeting." Jamarcus set down his cup. "They were about to walk out, and I was about to pivot," Preston replied sharply. "Do you think clients walk away because of a missing translator? Please. They walk because someone undermines leadership." "Is that what I did?" Preston smiled, his eyes flat. "Publicly, I'll praise you, maybe even give you a little bonus. But understand something. This deal happens because of me. You were a temporary fix. A tool, not the story." Jamarcus stood, calm, unshaken. "They know who did what." Preston leaned in. "Perception is reality. I own the narrative. You just rented it for a few minutes." He left without another word. That evening, media coverage flooded the web. Headlines read, "Billionaire CEO rescues deal." Despite last-minute chaos, Preston's photo adorned the top of every article. In the fourth paragraph, barely 2 lines, Jamarcus was mentioned. An on-site staff member with language skills. No name, no credit, no story. But one journalist, a young black writer from a smaller outlet, posted on X, "The janitor was the translator. Don't let the headline lie to you." The post gained traction. And somewhere deep in the building's boiler room, Jamarcus stood alone, scrolling through the tweet, unsure whether to feel pride or dread. He hadn't asked for fame, he'd only wanted to be seen. But in corporate America, the price of visibility was often invisibility sharpened like a knife. Then, his work phone buzzed. Blocked number. He answered. A voice spoke in calm Arabic. "This is Advisor Hamza. The prince would like to see you. Privately." Tomorrow. No intermediaries. As Jamarcus looked up from the call, he noticed a man in a blazer staring through the doorway, Preston's chief of staff, and he was already dialing someone. The next morning arrived with fog drifting low over Manhattan, dulling the skyline like a cigarette stain on glass. Inside the Grand Pavilion, the air buzzed again, but this time with a sharper edge, the kind that follows a secret everyone pretends not to know. Jamarcus had arrived early, as instructed, not as a guest, not as a translator, as janitorial staff. Again, his mop waited for him outside the executive conference wing, bucket filled, gloves folded on top, as though the previous day had never happened. The text from his supervisor had been brief. You've been scheduled to clean ballroom early. Use service entrance. No loitering near guests. There was no mention of the translation. No gratitude. No acknowledgement. But Jamarcus was no longer surprised by how quickly heroism evaporated when filtered through the lens of class and race. He'd saved the summit, earned the respect of a foreign royal family, and yet here he was, wiping down mirrors before the executives even finished breakfast. As he leaned over a sink with a rag in hand, a voice behind him chirped sharply. You again? Didn't think we'd see your face so soon. He turned. A white junior coordinator, barely out of college, badge swinging with authority, stared him down like she was checking for stolen keys. I'm here to clean, Jamarcus said evenly. She scoffed, eyeing him from head to toe. Hope you stay in your lane this time. Translators don't wear coveralls. She walked off before he could reply, muttering under her breath. Whole building got jokes now. In a nearby press room, Preston Vale sat at the head of a glass conference table, surrounded by his hand-picked PR strategists. His custom-tailored suit had been pressed 3 times that morning. His smile practiced in the mirror. We spin it as innovation, he said. An AI breakthrough. Real-time Arabic comprehension powered by our proprietary machine learning. A junior strategist raised her hand. But sir, that's not what happened. You didn't. Preston cut her off with a glare. We're shaping narrative, not history. He gestured toward a presentation board with mock headlines. One read, CEO's AI translator stuns global delegates. Another, Zetech unveils next-level Arabic fluency algorithm. His voice dropped an octave. They want a visionary, not a janitor with a hobby. Thousands of retweets, tens of thousands of likes. But then came the backlash. Another, is it diversity when the janitor plays interpreter, or just sad? In the corridor outside the executive boardroom, the Saudi delegates arrived again, this time with sharper expressions. Their translator stood at the back, hands clasped. They approached the check-in area, where a white executive assistant extended her hand. Welcome back, gentlemen. Mr. Vale is inside preparing. Where is Jamarcus? One advisor asked. She froze. Pardon? The delegate repeated. In deliberate English, we wish to speak with the young man, Jamarcus. The assistant's smile flickered like a power outage. Oh, he's not part of today's. We will wait, another interrupted, folding his arms. Word traveled fast. A PR rep ran to find Preston. They're asking for him again. Preston's eyes narrowed. We can't afford another scene. Get him a badge. Temporary. But he clocks in under janitor. Understood? 10 minutes later, Jamarcus stood outside the main ballroom again, now wearing 2 badges. One with his name and maintenance staff, another hastily printed, temporary translator. He walked in quietly. The Saudis turned and smiled. Good morning, Jamarcus greeted in Arabic. The oldest among them, advisor Hamza, nodded. Much better. They pulled him aside, not to translate, but to converse. Over small pastries and cardamom coffee, they discussed literature, Mahmoud Darwish's poetry, Gibran's philosophies, and then moved to technology. We are curious, one prince said, about how language can shape artificial intelligence, rather than the reverse. Jamarcus's eyes lit up. Language is not a code. It's a history. You can't teach a machine to understand if it's only listening to syntax. They were captivated. Meanwhile, Preston sat at the far end of the room, feigning conversation with investors, while eyeing Jamarcus like a snake cornered by its own tail. The prince pulled out a tablet, showed Jamarcus a Zetech prototype interface, and asked, do you see potential in this? Jamarcus studied it. His answer was careful, but honest. The interface misinterprets cultural nuance. Your dialect distinguishes power and respect through syntax. This software, it flattens them. The Saudis conferred with each other, nodding. But they weren't alone. Behind a temporary wall divider, Ava Durnell, Zetech's lead software architect, had paused mid-step. She'd heard it. Every word. She narrowed her eyes, lips parting slightly. She knew that flaw. She had buried that flaw in the last round of QA reports. Under pressure to meet deadline, Jamarcus had spotted it in seconds. She slipped away without being noticed, her mind spinning with consequences. Later in the staff hallway, Tasha, a black intern with coiled hair and restless eyes, caught Jamarcus refilling the mop bucket. "You were amazing in there," she said. Jamarcus smiled faintly. "Not sure that's the word the execs would use." "I didn't break protocol. I didn't even volunteer this time." He was right, and that terrified her. Because if he could see it, the Saudis surely had. She now faced a choice. Fix the flaw and risk exposing the company's cover-up, or ignore it and let the deal collapse later, on her name. But more than fear, something else bubbled in her chest. Resentment. How did a janitor do this? She opened a new folder on her desktop titled Internal Risk Report, Unauthorized Disclosure. Jamarcus's mind recalled that app long before he took the elevator down. An app built in his cramped Detroit bedroom, using borrowed time and outdated hardware. He had coded it in secret, layer by layer vocabulary drills, phonetic feedback, cultural context modules. It was a labor of love, a project born from being overlooked, yet determined to teach others to listen. Years ago, a white-run startup discovered his code on GitHub. They copied it, patented it. They claimed it as their own. Jamarcus was quietly erased. Cease and desist letters fell on deaf ears. His college-era teammates denied recognizing him. The app soared, lauded as AI-driven learning. He stayed invisible. Now in the Zetech demo room, the Saudis flagged a subtle glitch. The speech recognition tool misinterpreted homophones, confusing sir with ceremony, turning one phrase into unintended gibberish. The programmers ran tests for hours, but couldn't reproduce the error. Tension built. Alan grinned broadly. Preston glanced at Jamarcus sweeping nearby. He raised a hand toward him, but no one noticed. Instead, he nodded at Alan. Jamarcus paused, awareness flickering across his eyes. Not long after, Advisor Hamza approached Preston privately. "We are impressed with the system's correction. Who is responsible for this refinement? We would like to meet him." Preston tensed. He paused to calculate. Publicly, he could never credit a staff janitor. It conflicted with his carefully curated narrative. He was part of a quick-fix team. Preston replied. "A junior engineer. We'll arrange a meeting." In truth, he meant Alan. Expected protocol prohibited Jamarcus's access. Security headroom was a fabric to reinforce hierarchy. An hour later, a firm memo appeared at the staff elevator bank. Effective immediately, non-executive staff are prohibited from attending client-facing meetings under Section 9C of Company Security Policy. Jamarcus read it, pinned near his locker, his chest tightening like a vice. He asked the security guard, "Does that include translators?" In the evening, Jamarcus walked past his locker. Beneath the padlock, a white piece of paper tucked in. He unfolded it. In crisp, neat handwriting was written, "You saved the deal. Let's talk." No signature, no timestamp, just the invitation. His pulse leapt. His hands trembled only slightly. An unexpected twist hit him then. The note wasn't on top of the locker. It was stuck inside. Someone had risked entering his private space to deliver it. He looked around. The corridor was empty. Fluorescent lights buzzed above. No footprints. No video. But this was an acknowledgement he hadn't earned, yet deeply needed. That night, in his small apartment, he stared at the note again. Shadows from the street lamp traced patterns on the wall. The app he built flickered behind his eyelids. Every module stolen. Every credit papered over. Now a translated speech. Now an error caught. Now 2 badges pinned to his chest. His phone buzzed. It was an unblocked inbound message. "Tomorrow 3 p.m. Room 422. No stops. No number. No name." Expectations tangled with fear. Should he walk into this trap? Someone was reaching out. Wanting connection. Maybe salvation. Maybe more erasure. He was no longer just a cleaner. But the memo still hung. Security breach if unauthorized personnel enters client meeting. The memo's presence was a reminder. He was controlled. He was contained. He washed his hands in the restroom. Stared at his reflection. The ragged shirt now felt like armor. the badge like a medal. But the uniform? It was still a cage. Down the corridor, room 422 awaited. He arrived at 258. The door card lock glowed green. He held his breath and entered. Inside, the air smelled of sandalwood and old paper. Advisor Hamza stood beside a small conference table, alone. On the table, Turkish coffee and dates arranged on silver plates. "Good afternoon, Mr. Owens," he said in English, voice calm and kind, not royal abrasiveness. Genuine. Jamarcus sat, his heart pounded. "You showed us something more than a machine today," Hamza said softly. "You showed us integrity. That matters more to the prince." Jamarcus hesitated. "Thank you." Hamza continued. "You built something once, this app of yours. It reached us. That language, your voice in it, echoes still." Jamarcus realized. They'd researched. They knew. The advisor leaned forward, unbuttoned his robe. "We have resources to reclaim what is yours." Jamarcus felt shock. An unexpected twist. "A chance. You mean, help me relaunch?" Hamza nodded. "And more. Mentorship. Funding. Access. Your name. Credited." His chest tightened, tears blurred his vision. But he swallowed them. Outside, the door clicked. As he looked up to respond, the door cracked open again, and Ava Durnell peeked in. Phone in hand, eyes widening at the scene. The door clicked softly behind Ava Durnell, as she stepped back from room 422. Phone still glowing in her hand. She hadn't expected to see Jamarcus sitting across from advisor Hamza, sipping Arabic coffee like a diplomat. She certainly hadn't expected to see the Saudi prince's signature ink pen in front of him, placed beside what looked like a proposal packet. She took a screenshot. Quick, instinctive, then walked briskly down the hall, not toward HR, not toward engineering, but toward the executive boardroom. Inside, Preston Vale was already mid-sentence. "So let's keep this very clear," he said to a room of department heads. Whatever potential that janitor showed was a blip, not a career trajectory. No one corrected him. Preston smirked. "We're running a tech firm, not an inspirational after-school special. We can acknowledge him without promoting him." Ava stepped in, catching the last line. Preston blinked. "What?" A silence fell. Preston's jaw clenched so hard his temple twitched. "Then we end that pipeline," he said. "Today." The next day, a confidential HR directive was quietly authorized under Preston's name. Review employment history and digital footprint of staff member Jamarcus Owens. Look for disciplinary flags, public social commentary, academic infractions, and past tech affiliations. Discreetly. To the HR staff it was business. Routine, not a witch hunt. But Jamarcus's file, so clean it gleamed, felt suspicious to some. No known missteps, no formal complaints, no paper trail of anger, just talent, in the wrong uniform. But Preston wasn't looking for real misconduct. He was looking for narrative ammunition. Meanwhile, Jamarcus returned to work under a double shadow. On one hand, he'd just been offered a future potential backing from foreign royalty. On the other, he was still clocking into custodial shifts and avoiding the gaze of security cameras he no longer trusted. He kept to quiet corners, mopped silently, cleaned with grace. He learned long ago that when white institutions feel threatened, dignity becomes camouflage. In the break room, he crossed paths with Tasha again, the young intern with restless energy and a too-fast voice. "You were trending," she whispered. "Janitor Genius was on Black Twitter all night. They're saying you're the tech world's hidden architect. Like Baldwin with Binary." He gave a short laugh. "Not sure I want that kind of spotlight." Tasha's face turned serious. "I looked you up last night. You were my high school's robotics mentor. You told us code what the world refuses to see." That stuck. He hadn't remembered her, but her sincerity struck something inside him. "I've been tracking patent filings," she continued, "and internal IP reports. Some of the ideas on file under executive names, white execs, are ideas black engineers proposed in Slack threads months earlier." Jamarcus looked up. She wasn't exaggerating. This wasn't new. But now someone else saw it. They began comparing notes after hours. Tasha brought screenshots, Slack timestamps, erased feedback forms. Jamarcus compared them to project launch presentations. In two separate cases, ideas pitched by black junior staffers had been scrubbed from emails and later rebranded under white VP names. No mention, no credit, no apology. Late one evening, Jamarcus was emptying trash bins in the secondary security office. No one was inside. The screens were dark, except one blinking feed showing a split-screen playback of hallway cams from 2 days prior. Curious, he paused. The footage showed him entering room 4, and then, inexplicably, it cut to a looped hallway shot of him hovering by the elevator. Repeating, seamless. A cover-up. He leaned closer, checking the timestamp. The room entry had been erased. He scanned the feed folder. A subfile titled Event Redact 422 had been manually adjusted. Metadata showed the edit was executed under login. B. Marshall admin. Bethany Marshall, Preston's personal assistant. 10 minutes later, she appeared with a flash drive and her laptop. Yes. Pull any logs tied to B. Marshall admin from the last 72 hours. This one's dirty, she muttered. Footage was swapped using a mirroring script. Looks like she copied elevator cam footage, reversed it and overlaid it. Sloppy but effective. Can we prove it? She nodded. And we can trace it. But you need to see this. She turned the screen toward him. It showed Bethany not just deleting the footage, but forwarding a package labeled J. Owens Behavior Concerns to an internal inbox marked legal hold at vailtech.com. They were building a case, not based on actions, but on optics. Jamarcus leaned against the concrete wall, silent. This isn't about security anymore, he said. It's about containment. Tasha nodded slowly. They're trying to turn your story into a problem, she replied. Not a possibility. He closed his eyes. Rage was there, yes, but deeper. Something older, heavier. That gnawing grief of being watched just enough to erase, but never enough to see. Tasha suddenly gasped. On the footage, Bethany wasn't alone. A frame-by-frame review revealed another figure in the shadows, helping her access the security system. Alan Crisp. The revelation that Alan Crisp had helped Bethany doctor the security footage wasn't just betrayal, it was a signal. Jamarcus wasn't being ignored anymore. He was being actively silenced, and now that silence had a strategy behind it. It made everything clearer. The sudden bans from client meetings, the whispers in the halls, the way HR had vanished from conversations, and the Saudis asking for him, only to be brushed aside. They weren't coincidences. They were calculated. But if the system wanted to erase his presence, Jamarcus knew he needed something irrefutable, something louder than denial, stronger than tampered footage, and that meant catching Preston himself, not in a misstep, but in full truth. For the next 2 days, Jamarcus moved through the building like nothing had changed. He swept floors, polished brass, nodded politely to people who avoided eye contact. He clocked in, clocked out, carried the weight of his past, and his plan. On the third evening, with the boardroom empty and dusk bleeding through its glass windows, he left his phone in his mop bucket, screen off, recording on. The timing was perfect. Preston entered the boardroom with a senior consultant, relaxed, post-meeting. Their words started light, drifting between metrics and Q4 targets. And then Preston shifted into something darker, arrogant. You know what the media loves more than a genius? He said, his voice a sneer. A janitor genius. Feels like a redemption arc. Give them enough mops and broken homes, and suddenly they think it's a damn fairy tale. The consultant gave a shallow laugh. Unsure. Preston didn't care. He continued. He's lucky I didn't fire him on the spot. These diversity hires. Man, one headline and they think they own the building. The bile in Preston's voice was crystal clear. You give them a platform and they turn it into a protest. He's not special. He's an exception, dressed like the rule. It was all there. Every word, every insult. And now Jamarcus had it in his pocket. That night, in the boiler room with Tasha, they listened to the recording together. Her expression didn't flinch. She just stared at the screen, the sound of Preston's smugness echoing in the shadows. He really said that, she whispered. He really thinks that's okay. But Preston moved quickly. In a live-streamed press conference the same day, he stood in front of a navy blue backdrop with the Vailtech logo hovering behind him like a flag. I am saddened, he said, that a disgruntled employee with behavioral issues would distort private conversations taken out of context. His tone was calm, measured, legal. This individual has a history of emotional instability, he added, and was recently involved in an internal ethics review. We believe this is a coordinated attack on our values. He never said Jamarcus's name. But he didn't have to. By midnight, Jamarcus's employee portal had been deactivated. When he arrived at work the next morning, his badge didn't buzz. A security guard handed him a sealed envelope. Inside, a formal letter read, "Effective immediately, Jamarcus Owens is placed on unpaid leave pending internal review of conduct violations and security breaches." That evening, Jamarcus sat in his dark apartment, phone on the coffee table. The headlines were still spinning, his name floating between heroism and sabotage. There were hundreds of messages, journalists, activists, strangers, but none he wanted to hear. Until one text stood out. "I believe you. Let's tell your story." Page, The Verity Press. Jamarcus blinked. He knew the name. The Verity Press was fearless. The same platform that had exposed misconduct at MIT, abuse in Amazon's AI division, and racism in city-level police algorithms. They weren't chasing likes. They chased accountability. He texted back one word. It was a leaked internal email, screenshotted and spreading online. "Prepare full legal escalation if Subject Owens escalates his narrative. Reputation protection strategy begins Monday." They weren't just preparing to fire him. They were preparing to destroy him. By sunrise, the blog post had climbed from underground digital forums to the front page of Reddit, like wildfire tracing a fault line. The headline hit like a wrecking ball. "Black Janitor speaks 4 languages, saved $1 trillion deal, then fired." It wasn't just news. It was a rupture. Within hours, CNN, MSNBC, and even conservative talk shows were flashing Jamarcus Owens' face across the screen. That still frame, him standing beside the Saudi delegation in his maintenance uniform, badge hanging, mop bucket behind him, became an emblem. Memes were born. Digital artists sketched murals. Activists renamed group chats. In the janitor who translated, power. He had become a symbol overnight, of corporate erasure, of systemic racism in Silicon Valley, of brilliance scrubbed clean by gatekeepers too fragile to admit the truth. Preston Vale, however, refused to back down. From the 38th floor of Zetech's headquarters, he gathered his internal team, PR, legal, and cybersecurity, and launched a counteroffensive. In a public video statement, he sat in a sterile office, flanked by American flags and binary art pieces, as if patriotism and code could mask contempt. "We've reviewed the audio and video in question," he said, his voice calm but cold, "and our cybersecurity team believes it was artificially generated using advanced deepfake technology." He stared into the camera with what he must have thought was sincerity. "We are currently investigating the sources of this forgery, and the individuals responsible. At Zetech we value diversity and inclusion, but we cannot tolerate the spread of misinformation at the expense of truth." That statement was enough to bait mainstream doubt. Enough for a few tech execs and Reddit threads to start questioning. Could it have been manipulated? Could this be a grudge play? But facts don't bend forever. Not when receipts speak louder than rhetoric. Tasha, ever 5 steps ahead, had already anticipated the smear campaign. She uploaded a backup of the original audio, including the metadata, timestamps and full video overlay, to 3 separate platforms with blockchain validation. She shared it with the Verity Press, who then ran forensic checks and published the conclusion: verified, unaltered, authenticated by 4 independent labs. And then came the second leak, a snippet of the internal Zetech meeting, secretly recorded by a junior HR rep, where Preston told his legal team, "We don't need it to be fake, we just need enough people to think it might be." That line, that's when the tide turned. Protests began outside Zetech's San Francisco headquarters by midweek. They started small. A few dozen activists, mostly black and brown tech workers and students, holding signs, "Brilliance looks like this. How many more Jamarcuses? Tech ain't neutral." By Friday it had ballooned to over 2,000. Diversity groups from Twitter, Google and Meta joined in solidarity. Portable speakers blasted Jamarcus's speech audio. Artists painted a mural 2 stories tall, a portrait of Jamarcus in a janitor's uniform, surrounded by Arabic calligraphy that translated to "Truth needs no title." Inside the building, tension crackled like electricity trapped under glass. Tasha, now branded as the quiet rebel leader, began organizing a coordinated walkout. She gathered signatures, spoke in whispered meetings, distributed encrypted flyers through burner accounts. Her message was clear: if they can erase Jamarcus, they can erase us all. Her email read, "At 3:00 p.m. tomorrow, we stop. We step out. We remind them that silence isn't compliance. It's conditioning. And we're done being conditioned. Hundreds responded. Asian, Latinx, Black, and even some white allies. From interns to senior developers. It wasn't just about Jamarcus anymore. It was about every voice buried under boardroom tables. On the morning of the walkout, Zetech's executive suite was in chaos. Preston paced like a man whose empire was cracking. He barked orders, made threats, offered bonuses. No one walks, he told his department heads. Anyone who does, consider their contract reevaluated. But fear no longer held the same weight. At exactly 3:00 p.m., elevators opened. Hundreds of employees filed out in silence, wearing printed shirts that read "Language is power." Listen. Preston watched from the 38th floor. And for the first time, he looked small. Meanwhile, Jamarcus remained quiet, not hiding but choosing stillness. He had declined interview requests, turned down speaking engagements, and refused to appear on cable shows. This wasn't about becoming a celebrity. It was about being seen. And he had already said what needed to be said. He watched the walkout from a live stream on his cracked phone, seated on the roof of his apartment building. Alone. When his face appeared on the screen, blown up on picket signs, projected onto skyscrapers, he didn't smile. He just breathed and exhaled years of being invisible. The unexpected twist came the next morning. A letter appeared on every major global outlet's front page. The New York Times, Al Jazeera, The Guardian. It read, "To whom it may concern, we, the undersigned members of the Saudi economic delegation, would like to publicly acknowledge and reaffirm the instrumental role Jamarcus Owens played in building mutual trust and success during our recent negotiations with Zetech. His expertise in language, culture, and diplomacy not only preserved a historic deal, it dignified it. It is unacceptable that his contribution was dismissed, denied, or downplayed. We support Jamarcus. We see Jamarcus, and we stand with the truth he represents." Advisor Hamza bin Sufyan. Chief Cultural Envoy. Prince Khalid Al Tayeb, Strategic Tech Partner. Preston Vale read that letter alone in his office, the words reflecting in the glass of his desk like a verdict. His hands trembled slightly. His jaw set in denial, then fury, but the damage was done. He hadn't just lost control of the story. He had lost his moral currency, the intangible asset that made billionaires appear human. And that was something no PR firm could buy back. As media cameras waited outside Zetech for Preston's official response, Tasha received a secure text. They're trying to freeze Jamarcus's finances. Offshore accounts. Leverage. He needs protection now. The letter from the Saudi delegation was the final crack in a dam that could no longer hold. Overnight, Zetech stock plummeted 27%. Wall Street's algorithmic confidence in Preston Vale faltered with every retweet. Every blog dissecting his missteps. Every influencer reposting the letter alongside the viral image of Jamarcus in his janitor's uniform. The caption most reposted. He didn't just speak Arabic. He translated truth. Investors panicked. Tech journals flipped their tone. Where they once praised Preston's visionary aggression, they now published headlines like "Zetech CEO faces racial scandal fallout." News tickers read, "Zetech faces $400 million in sponsor losses as brand reputation crumbled." Prestige firms pulled out. Multinational sponsors dropped planned campaigns. One even cited ethical misalignment with leadership. The company's main sponsor, a European fintech firm, released a two-line statement. "We cannot support platforms that treat integrity like a liability." Inside Zetech's headquarters, chaos reigned. Preston held emergency damage control meetings that bled into the early morning hours. Board members began to splinter, some demanding transparency, others whispering about resignation. A confidential internal vote was proposed, whether to begin transition talks to replace Preston as CEO. And yet, the man himself refused to believe his throne was shaking. He doubled down, spun narratives, threatened to sue bloggers, journalists, and even former interns. His hubris, once coated in charm, had begun to rot in the daylight. Meanwhile, Jamarcus sat in a modest cafe in Brooklyn, wearing a second-hand sweater and sipping mint tea like the world wasn't watching him. He didn't smile. He didn't glow. He merely observed the storm he never intended to start. His phone buzzed, quietly. The message was short. "My Tech Week. We want you." Translator slot. AI and cross-culture panel. He stared at it for a long moment, unsure whether to laugh or delete it. He hadn't spoken on a stage since high school debate club. He hadn't even been invited to sit at most company meetings, let alone tech summits. He forwarded the message to Tasha. She replied instantly. Accept. Then ask them to update your role. You're not a translator anymore. You're the keynote. He didn't believe they'd agree, but they did. 3 hours later, the organizers followed up with an updated invitation. Same time, same date. But now, under his name, it read, Keynote. Jamarcus Owens, Rebuilding Tech with Human Language. When he arrived at the convention center in Manhattan, the security at the front desk greeted him with recognition and wide eyes. We've got a seat reserved backstage, sir. Sir. The word echoed like a kind of personal justice. He walked past logos of tech giants and flashing monitors, down a corridor where posters of last year's speakers still hung. Founders, billionaires, faces of power. His own poster now stood among them. Out of place, yet impossible to ignore. A black man in a janitor's uniform. Mid-sentence, Arabic script floating behind him in artistic layers. He entered the green room. Tasha was already there, prepping his notes and outfit, a tailored black shirt, clean jeans, and a small mic. No suit? He joked.
No mask, she replied.
The audience that day numbered in the thousands. Investors, coders, developers, journalists. Some came for the scandal. Some came for solidarity. Most came because they wanted to see how the janitor would carry the room. Jamarcus stepped onto the stage. The lights were blinding. His hands didn't shake. He began not with stats or quotes, but with silence. 20 seconds of eye contact. Standing still. The audience grew restless, curious. Then he spoke. People think language is about speaking, he said. But real language, it's what happens when someone listens and doesn't try to rename your truth. He walked them through his journey, not as a victim, but as a builder. He spoke of Detroit, of his mother, of late-night learning, and code built by hand. He didn't say Preston's name once. But the room understood the ghost haunting every sentence. When he spoke about the app he created years ago, the one stolen, repackaged, and sold under someone else's name, he paused, then tapped the screen behind him. A document appeared. Patent Filing 724A, Context-Aware Multilingual Recognition Model. Dated 4 years prior. Author Jamarcus Owens. He showed the GitHub link, the time-stamped commits, the code libraries. Then he showed the Zetech product, nearly identical, line for line. The crowd went silent. Then the applause started. Not thunderous but sustained. Respectful. Real. And then came the interruption. From the side aisle, Preston Vale entered the auditorium. He didn't walk, he marched. No badge, no pass, no clearance. Just a bitter legacy refusing to die quietly. He climbed the steps of the stage mid-sentence. This man, Preston said, gesturing at Jamarcus with a wide open arm, is not who you think he is. The crowd froze. Some whispered. Security moved. Hesitated. Preston continued. He's a janitor. A disgruntled one. He's built nothing without the systems we gave him. The company I built gave him a platform. And this? This is career theft. Jamarcus didn't flinch. He turned to Preston, looked him straight in the eye, and said into the mic, calmly, You didn't give me a platform. You gave me a mop.
The crowd erupted. Not with noise, with a shift. A rupture in posture. Some stood, some clapped. A few booed.
Preston was escorted off stage, ranting until he disappeared behind the curtains. Backstage, as the noise died down, Jamarcus sat on a bench sipping water. A man in traditional Saudi attire approached. It was Prince Khalid Al Tayyib, the youngest delegate in the royal family's tech initiative. He sat beside Jamarcus. No words for a moment. Then he pulled out a small folder and handed it to him. Inside, a signed funding commitment, stamped and sealed. It read, For the development of Zetech, a new standard for cultural integration in global AI systems, fully backed by the Tayyib Tech Trust. Founder Jamarcus Owens. Jamarcus stared. This is yours, the prince said, then added, smiling slightly. Unless you'd prefer to keep mopping corporate messes. As Jamarcus blinked in disbelief. His phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't tech-related. A voicemail from an unfamiliar number played. Mr. Owens, we need to talk. This goes beyond Preston. Your name is now tied to offshore accounts in Dubai, and someone's trying to bury the trail. The voicemail echoed through the empty green room, like a prophecy cloaked in static. Jamarcus held the phone against his ear longer than necessary, replaying the final words in his mind. Your name is now tied to offshore accounts in Dubai, and someone's trying to bury the trail. He didn't understand. Not yet. But what he did know was this: silence had never saved him before, and it wouldn't now. That night he sat with Tasha in her apartment, the Zetech proposal still spread out between them. It wasn't just a startup idea anymore. It was a necessity, a shield, a sword and a declaration all at once. "We can't wait," he said. "They'll come harder." Quietly this time. Tasha nodded. "Then we build loud." And so Zetech was born. The name came from a blend of Swahili and Arabic. Zay, meaning like or manner in Arabic, and the subtle nod to Z as the last letter in the alphabet, a symbol of those always placed last. It wasn't just an AI platform. It was a reclamation project. Unlike other language apps that relied on robotic translations and rigid grammar patterns, Zetech was designed to listen. It incorporated regional dialects, tonal shifts, ancestral vocabulary. It adapted based on user culture and speech rhythm. You didn't learn from it, you grew with it. The first prototype launched in beta to a test group of 5,000 users, primarily Black and brown communities from underserved schools, immigrant neighborhoods, and multilingual homes. Within 72 hours, it trended on social media. Users posted reactions. "For once I don't sound broken when I speak Spanish. My grandma's Yoruba accent works perfectly. It finally gets me." Within a week, Tasha was fielding press inquiries while coding back-end support. Jamarcus juggled interviews, investor emails, and security checks. He barely slept, often spending dawn staring out his apartment window, haunted by the growing success and the voicemail that still lingered like fog. Word spread fast. Former Zetech employees, coders, interns, analysts, began contacting them quietly. Some were Black, some brown, one was white, and couldn't sleep, knowing their name sat on a project they didn't create. They wanted in, but they didn't want attention. Jamarcus didn't blame them. "You can build with us," he said in encrypted messages, "but I won't let you build over us." They agreed. And Zetech's small team swelled. A digital underground railroad of brilliance, fleeing the plantation of corporate theft. Meanwhile, the empire Preston built was crumbling. Federal investigators, pushed by viral outrage and mounting media pressure, began to examine Zetech's finances. What they found shocked even the skeptics. Preston had funneled millions into shell companies that hired ghost coders, many of whom had names suspiciously close to real Black engineers. The scheme masked the theft of code, allowing Preston to claim internal development while quietly exploiting innovations by silenced minorities. He was subpoenaed on charges of racial discrimination, fraud, and intellectual property theft. Tech magazines called it the fall of Silicon's last pharaoh. But Preston didn't fold. In a leaked audio from a closed-door meeting, he sneered, "They built it on my back. Without my pressure, he'd still be sweeping floors." The court of public opinion disagreed, and more importantly, so did the courts. By month's end, Zetech was downloaded by over 500,000 users. It was no longer a curiosity, it was a revolution. Kids in community centers used it to speak to their immigrant parents. Teachers integrated it into ESL programs. It became the Zone 1 educational app in Kenya, and the 3 in the Bronx. The tagline was simple: Zetech, speak your world, we'll listen. But even dreams built from dust can draw shadows. One evening, Jamarcus sat alone in the new Zetech office, a modest co-working space, overlooking downtown Brooklyn. He'd just finished a late call with a Brazilian education minister when his phone buzzed.
No caller ID.
"Just a text. They won't let you rise without a fight." He stared at the screen. It wasn't a threat. It was a warning. Attached to the message was a screenshot of a transfer receipt, a massive deposit into an offshore account labeled Owens Intel Holdings, Dubai. He blinked. He had never opened any account abroad, never wired funds internationally. But this account used his name, his credentials down to a misfiled apartment address from his college housing records. His fingers trembled slightly. This was bigger than defamation. Someone was planting evidence, burying it beneath layers of fake legitimacy, preparing to make him look like the next fraud. Or worse, the villain who turned justice into a scam. He called Tasha immediately. "This is more than Preston," he said. "I know," she answered. Her voice was tired, but clear. "We're playing in spaces where we weren't meant to exist. You think they'll just let that happen?" They didn't cry. They didn't panic. They planned. Tasha initiated a forensic audit trail with a privacy rights firm based in Geneva. They had one goal: trace every shadow back to its source. Jamarcus reached out to Page from the Verity Press, who connected them to whistleblower defense attorneys. And yet the fear crept in. Not fear of loss, but fear of invisibility. That all he'd built, all he'd spoken, would be buried beneath a false scandal and corporate machine. But then something shifted. As the audit team dug deeper, they discovered that one of the dummy shell companies tied to the Dubai account was actually registered in Delaware, under the name U-Bridge Analytics. That company? A Zetech subsidiary. Still active. Still under Preston's control. As Jamarcus processed the evidence, his email pinged with a new alert. Notice of financial investigation, U.S. Treasury Department. Your presence is requested within 48 hours. The Treasury Department's official letter sat on the simple desk like a judge's gavel, waiting to fall. Its embossing shimmered in the lamplight, as if the seal itself radiated authority. Tasha watched in silence from the kitchen's archway, arms crossed, determination etched in her every line. 48 hours. That was all they'd given him to prove he wasn't laundering money. Money he had never touched, accounts he had never opened, transfers he hadn't authorized. Yet the summons felt less like procedure than a trial by appearance, the kind of setup built to erode trust before evidence is ever required. What followed was brutal. Hate descended in digital torrents, faster than any storm he had seen before. Anonymous social media profiles spat venomous claims at him, accusations of espionage, deceptions, statements like, Zetech is a Trojan horse for foreign influence, or how does a janitor build a global AI platform anyway? His Detroit apartment address, once forgotten, was leaked, followed by his mother's maiden name, and then photos of his worn notebook and coffee mugs, trailing like breadcrumbs of personal intimacy. His inbox filled with emails threatening violence and silence, a single one saying, "We know where you sleep. Better still, speak less." Zetech's app, still waiting to be judged on its own merit, suddenly sank in the stores with thousands of fake one-star reviews accusing it of reverse racism, woke indoctrination, and worse, black supremacy disguised as software. He stayed calm through it all, until the subtle tyranny crept through his own door. One evening he returned to find the hallway light dimmed in the mid-building corridor, and his apartment door ajar. There was no sign of forced entry, no broken lock, no displaced frame, only the feeling of invasive stillness. Inside, nothing was stolen. His computer prototype devices and files remained untouched, and yet everything had been rearranged, with a deliberate hand. A chair shifted slightly toward the center. Books were angled just so. His coffee mug, which he always set on the left side of the table, sat precisely at center, untouched but glaring in its unnatural prominence. This was no burglary. It was psychological warfare. He called the police, who arrived late, and offered a quick snapshot of interest. The response? Probably a prank. No forensic team, no camera playback, no fingerprints. But there were questions. Why had the intruder not taken anything? What message were they sending? Was it meant to terrify without violence? To unsettle without pain? He filed no insurance claim. Instead, he sat on his couch for hours, lights off, listening to his own shallow breathing, while the night outside buzzed with indifference. Later that night, Tasha arrived unexpectedly. She didn't knock. She didn't ask permission to stay. She only entered, dragging her laptop and a duffel of cables into the living room, as if ghosting into protective presence. She sat without preamble next to him on the couch. The silence spoke. After a moment, she looked at him with steady clarity and said, "They're targeting every part of you they can reach. Digital, physical, psychological. This isn't about your work alone. It's about whether they can intimidate brilliance into hiding." He said nothing then, only stared at the muted glow of the street lamp filtered through the window curtains. Hours might have passed before his voice emerged. "I'm thinking about leaving. The country, the company, everything." And she replied, firm, "You can't. I could." "Then I shouldn't." "Why not?" Her answer came, unwavering. "Because if you leave, if you disappear, then they win. And every kid in Detroit or Brooklyn who opened Zetech and heard their own voice in return, you're teaching them that truth has an expiration date." Then, the envelope arrived. No stamp, no return. Just his name in neat cursive across the front of thick parchment. Inside, reams of documents, bank statements, offshore trust paperwork, shell subsidiary memos, internal emails linking Zetech to U-Bridge Analytics, the same company forensic analysts had traced, all leading through chains of wire transfers from Delaware to Dubai to Cayman entities. The final page was marked with a sticky note in black ink, Use this wisely. Don't become him. That note felt heavier than all the threats combined. It wasn't a curse. It was a mirror. He handed the documents to Tasha. Their living room turned into a war room. The gravity in her eyes told him the reality. This was more than corporate theft. It was harassment by power hungry enough to manufacture evidence to bury truth. He didn't flinch. When she looked past the numbers to the implications, she whispered, "This could bring Zetech to its knees." He nodded, knowing her implication. "And yet if he didn't expose it, they will," she said softly. "They'll leak about you instead." Silence, deep and bruising, filled the room. The kind that held the weight of both fear and resolve. Later, Jamarcus sat alone in a dim corner, the sticky note in one hand, his old badge in the other. He remembered being ushered into Zetech orientation, as a janitor, head bowed, eyes down, told to stay invisible. He recalled the orientation smile from Preston Vale, the corporate charm that masked the distance in his tone. He recalled the nights in Detroit, studying Arabic under flickering lamps, building prototypes in his basement out of necessity and pride. And he remembered every time someone told him brilliance had limits, based on uniform or name. Now he was being watched, not as builder, but as target. In the morning, he composed an email with surgical precision. Subject line, whistleblower evidence, for immediate investigation. Attached the bank trails, shell documents, network traces, memos, the sticky note image. Recipients, the U.S. Treasury Department's Fraud Division, the Verity Press, and a global investigative journalism coalition known as C4 Cybernetic Corruption Catchers. Finger hovered. He pressed send. 10 minutes later, he escaped to the hallway to breathe. A stranger in a gray hoodie passed him, quietly slipped into his coat pocket a flash drive, and whispered, "They have eyes in your circle. You're not paranoid, you're hunted." Under his breath, as the door clicked shut, those words echoed more than a threat, more like a compass point for what was coming next. Minutes later, his phone buzzed again. New email. Urgent, multiple FBI subpoenas issued to U-Bridge and Zetech execs. You've triggered a federal fraud inquiry. Secure counsel immediately. The summons came not from a courtroom, but from Capitol Hill. A formal invitation, wrapped in national attention and legislative language. The United States House Committee on Technology and Ethics respectfully requests the testimony of Mr. Marcus Owens regarding systemic racial bias, intellectual theft, and corporate retaliation within the tech sector. Jamarcus read it twice before breathing. The setting would be historic, televised, transcribed, immortalized. A black man once paid to mop the floors of billionaires, now asked to sit before Congress and speak on how tech was being built on buried black genius. Tasha placed the envelope down gently, then met his gaze. "You ready for the cost of being seen?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The Capitol hearing room was packed. Cameras flashed. Rows of lawmakers leaned forward, eyes sharp behind their glasses. Industry executives watched on monitors from corners of the room like vultures pretending to be mentors. Jamarcus took his seat at the witness table. No entourage, no suit. Just his own presence, calm and unadorned. His opening statement was short, but every syllable carved through years of suppression like sunlight through frost. Technology doesn't exist in a vacuum. It inherits the bias of its builders. And when those builders silence voices like mine, erase our names, repurpose our work, lock us out with NDAs and fake policies, they don't just steal code, they steal futures. There was no theatrics, no shouting, just a voice tempered by scars and purpose. He spoke about Zetech, about code stripped of cultural empathy, about Preston Vale's racial mockery, about the shell companies used to bury his contributions, and about the fear not of failure, but of being successful in a skin color that made that success seem suspicious. Lawmakers nodded. Some looked shaken. One asked, "What would you change if you had the power?" Jamarcus replied, "Access, accountability, and memory. This country forgets too quickly who actually builds the future." The transcript would go viral within hours. Across the nation, the movement surged again. Protesters flooded cities wearing janitor uniforms in solidarity. Murals went up on boarded buildings. Jamarcus with a broom in one hand, a glowing circuit board in the other. Celebrities tweeted the new rallying cry, from broom to boardroom. Students held sit-ins at tech-funded universities. Panels were disrupted by chants of credit black code. High schoolers in Detroit held a teach-in using Zetech as their platform. Jamarcus had become more than a name. He was now a story, a symbol that could not be sanitized by spin. And then Preston Vale resigned. Not out of guilt, but strategy. At a press conference, he stepped to the podium, wearing the same defiant smirk he had weaponized for years. "I am choosing to step down so this company can refocus," he said. "Let's not lose sight of the future, because we are distracted by the noise of the past." He left without answering questions, but behind the scenes, his influence lived on. 3 weeks after Jamarcus's congressional testimony, Zetech's board received a mysterious acquisition offer. The bidder, Innovation Core Holdings, a shell company with no public face. They offered $170 million for a controlling stake in Zetech. Tasha dug into the paperwork and uncovered the layers. Innovation Core was indirectly linked to an old Vale Tech ally, a venture capital firm known for whitewashing black-led tech startups, replacing leadership, and erasing origin stories under the guise of scaling growth. Jamarcus stood in front of the boardroom, proposal packet in hand, and said, "This isn't investment, it's a hostile cleansing." The board was split. Some agreed. Others hesitated. The company was scaling fast but bleeding resources. An offer this big could erase debt, stabilize infrastructure, and double salaries overnight. But Jamarcus knew, selling would cost more than equity. It would cost the soul of the thing he bled to build. He refused. That night, a board member quit in silence. Not to protest, not to warn, but to defect. 3 days later, Zetech's servers blinked off at 3:07 a.m. All user data gone. The recovery team worked in horror. Backups? Corrupted. Archives? Missing. Every language library. Every user preference. Every personalized adaptation protocol Zetech was praised for, wiped clean. It wasn't a regular hack. It was precise, internal, and surgical. A betrayal disguised as a breach. In the control room, Tasha stood pale, fists clenched, screen flashing red error codes. "This wasn't just sabotage," she said. "This was surgical deletion. They knew what to target. They knew what." Jamarcus sat frozen. Not in shock. Not in anger. In mourning. He had poured his story into that code. And now the story had been erased again. As he sat in the silent dark of the control room, his phone buzzed with a new message. "They didn't delete everything. One of your early prototypes was stored offline. But it's not where you think. It's in your mother's house, under her floorboards. Find it before they do." The control room remained dark long after the last blinking error message faded into silence. The humming servers, once alive with user data and multilingual code lines, now stood like monuments to a dream buried beneath betrayal. Jamarcus sat in the middle of it all, shoulders hunched, eyes empty. The silence wasn't just technological, it was personal, echoing years of effort vanished in a blink. There were no tears, just the cold ache of being stripped of something sacred. Tasha stood behind him, eyes fixed on the final log entry, 3 lines of code that confirmed their worst fear. Every custom input, every dialect, every community-developed extension had been wiped. Their entire vision, rebuilt from lived experience and cultural nuance, had been torched by someone who knew exactly what mattered. It wasn't the software they had tried to destroy. It was the story behind it. She broke the silence. "It's gone." Jamarcus didn't speak. The word "gone" echoed in the room like a gunshot with no sound, only impact. He rose slowly, walked to the main terminal, and shut it down manually. Not in defeat. In ritual. The system hadn't just crashed. It had been assassinated. And if they were going to rebuild, they had to first bury the remains. That night, back at her apartment, Tasha pulled out an old drive she hadn't touched in months. It was small, dusty, and barely labeled, a habit formed after witnessing too many stolen ideas with polished branding. She plugged it into her system and waited. As the drive loaded, her breath caught. There it was. An early prototype of Zetech's original engine. It lacked updates, user analytics, and modern interface. But the soul was intact. It even included the first community-submitted dialect modules. Spoken Creole from Louisiana, Appalachian slang, coastal Swahili inflections from East African exchange students. She whispered into the quiet, "We still got the roots." She called Jamarcus. "You remember that backup I made?" she said, her voice cautious. "The one you told me was overkill." "Yeah, I think it just saved us." The next morning, they met in a co-working space Tasha had rented under a different name. Word hadn't yet spread about the hack's true source, but they both knew it would soon. So they moved fast. Together, they spent 36 straight hours rebuilding the foundation from the prototype. No sleep, no music, just code, cables, and whispered urgency. This time, they didn't build it for users.
They built it with them.
The new Zetech wasn't sleek. It wasn't pretty, but it was alive. They renamed the platform Zetech Commons. The Commons stood for community-owned infrastructure. No ads, no buyouts, just co-op language learning and development. They invited early users back through encrypted links, asking for help, not money, help restoring dialects, re-uploading voice notes, resharing forgotten cultural idioms. The response was overwhelming. Ghanaians submitted Twi phrases with proper tonal keys. Black American teens coded African American vernacular English modules with confidence. Quechua speakers uploaded oral history. Elder Somali immigrants recorded lullabies in their tongue. And every line of code had attribution, real names, real faces, real ownership. By the end of the month, Zetech Commons was featured in an independent education newsletter. Then a refugee language coalition promoted it across Europe. Then a TikTok post showing a deaf child using the app for multilingual sign translation went viral. Downloads spiked. Servers stuttered. They had to expand bandwidth twice in the first week. Donations poured in, not venture capital, but grassroots support. Teachers, translators, social workers. People who didn't care about stock options, just about being heard. One message read, "This isn't software, this is healing." Still, the specter of Preston Vale loomed. Rumors surfaced that Preston's allies were regrouping under a new LLC, preparing to launch a competing app, one built with artificial inclusivity but none of Zetech's moral spine. Jamarcus wasn't surprised. "I told you," he said to Tasha, "they won't let us build without trying to steal the bricks." But this time, she replied, "We've got too many people holding the blueprints." Then the unexpected twist arrived. A letter from the office of the White House. Thick paper. Raised seal. Inside, a single sentence. "Mr. Owens, you are requested for nomination to the President's National Tech Advisory Board. Please confirm availability for briefing and policy consultation." There was no congratulation, no preamble. Just a call to the table he was never meant to sit at. He stared at it in silence, unsure whether to laugh, cry, or decline out of exhaustion. Tasha raised her brows. "You ready for that?" He looked up. "No," he admitted, "but I think it's ready for me." That night, as he reviewed the letter again under his desk lamp, an encrypted email appeared in his inbox. No subject line. No sender. Inside, a single line of text. "If you walk into that briefing, be prepared. The tech board isn't just policy, it's surveillance." The lobby hadn't changed. Its marble floors still gleamed with polished ambition. The ceiling chandeliers still dripped with the arrogance of unchecked wealth. And the security guards, mostly white, mostly wary, still stood at the doors with the same practiced, polite suspicion. But today, Jamarcus didn't enter through the service entrance. There was no mop bucket, no key card with time-limited access. He stepped into the Grand Pavilion's central hall with a security escort, not to be searched, but to be announced. "Please welcome Mr. Jamarcus Owens, co-founder of Zetech Commons and member of the National Tech Advisory Board." Applause rolled across the room like thunder cracking through marble. This was the same building where he had once been told to stay invisible, where he was once asked to polish the floors he now walked with authority. Flashbulbs snapped as he made his way to the elevated stage. His name was projected in tall, bold letters behind him, floating above a silhouette that once belonged to a man most in the audience would have overlooked. But not today. Today, his story had already filled screens, inspired protests, shaken companies, and shifted the cultural axis of Silicon Valley. Still, as he stepped up to the microphone, Jamarcus's mind flickered back to the past. To that first day, years ago, when he had stood at the back of this very room, wearing a gray janitor's shirt, the scent of ammonia in his gloves, the weight of silence in his chest, the overheard laughter of executives who would never remember his face, only the reflection of their own. He remembered the moment the Saudi delegation nearly walked out, because no translator had been arranged, and how he had stepped forward to speak, not just in Arabic, but in Now he stood in front of the same global summit, not as a solution to a mistake, but as the story. The crowd before him was filled with dignitaries, entrepreneurs, media figures, and young innovators. The World Language and AI Summit was hosting leaders from over 40 countries, His keynote was slotted between a U.S. Secretary of Education and a German robotics pioneer. He cleared his throat. Years ago, he began. I was told to stay out of this room, not because I didn't belong, but because someone decided brilliance had a dress code. A few audience members chuckled. Others nodded solemnly. I used to push a mop through this exact hallway. I cleaned up after conversations that would later become investments. I heard futures discussed in accents I admired, but never felt welcomed by. I didn't say much back then, because I was taught that survival sometimes meant quiet. He paused. But what I learned and what I'm here to remind you is that language is not just how we speak, it's how we exist. And no algorithm, no institution, no gatekeeper has the right to deny that existence. The crowd rose in a standing ovation before he even reached the halfway mark. But as he spoke, flashbacks stitched themselves behind his eyes. He saw his younger self wiping the conference room table as a tech VP mocked the accent of a Nigerian programmer. He remembered overhearing HR whisper, "Brilliant, but hard to place. He's too intense." He remembered smiling politely as another employee asked, "You ever think of doing something with your voice, man? Like podcasts or barbershop poetry?" And now all those moments, the patronizing, the microaggressions, the refusal to see, had been rearranged. He wasn't behind the curtain anymore. He was the stage. When the keynote ended, journalists swarmed. Delegates leaned in to offer invitations, cards, grants. Jamarcus smiled, thanked them, and drifted toward the back of the room. He didn't want more attention. He needed stillness. Processing. That's when he saw them. 3 rows from the front. A group of black students. Young, eyes wide. One had his phone out, recording quietly. Another wiped a tear. They weren't influencers. They weren't from prep academies or tech incubators. They were from somewhere he knew by spirit, if not by name. The margins. As he walked toward them, the youngest among them, a girl with short braids and a worn-out Zetech hoodie, stepped forward. "You changed the game," she whispered. "They told me to switch majors, said I didn't fit the field. But then I watched your story, and I stayed." Jamarcus's voice cracked. "Then you've already won." She reached out, and they hugged, quickly, carefully, but it carried weight. She wasn't the only one crying now. As he turned to walk back toward the green room, something shifted in the crowd. A commotion, not loud, just focused, intentional. From the far edge of the hallway, near the coat check area, a woman stepped forward. She wore a head wrap and a long navy blue jacket. Her eyes studied Jamarcus like she was seeing a ghost. But not in fear, in memory. He paused. She approached slowly. "Jamarcus?" she said, her voice cautious but warm. He nodded. "I'm your mother's sister." Time stilled. "I'm your aunt," she continued. "There's something you need to know. We need to talk." Before he could answer, she reached into her bag and pulled out a folded envelope. On it, in handwriting he hadn't seen since high school, was a name that hadn't been spoken in years. Aaliyah Owens, his mother, and below it, "For Jamarcus, when he's finally seen." Jamarcus stared at the envelope as though it held a different kind of gravity. Its edges were soft from age, its ink faded, but the name across the front was unmistakable. Aaliyah Owen, his mother's name handwritten in the same looping strokes he remembered from birthday cards and sticky note affirmations taped to his bedroom mirror. And underneath, in smaller letters, was a phrase she'd never said aloud, but that now felt destined for Jamarcus, when he's finally seen. He looked up, breath unsteady. "She left this?" His aunt nodded. Her voice barely carried above the soft buzz of hallway voices. "She wrote it the year before she passed. Gave it to me with one instruction. He won't find this until the world finally sees him. Don't give it until he doesn't have to ask permission anymore." Jamarcus clutched the envelope tighter, heart pounding not from fear but from the weight of history, finally answering itself. That night, he didn't open it immediately. He sat alone in his apartment, the letter beside a cup of cooling tea, his fingers interlaced, and still. He let the silence build, because whatever it held, it would change things. He felt it in his chest, like his name was about to grow a second meaning. When he finally broke the seal, the paper inside crackled gently. There were 2 pages. The first was a letter. "My son," it began, "if you're reading this, then the world must have finally caught up to what I always knew, that you were never made to follow their scripts. You were born to write new ones." Her words danced like memory. She went on to explain that before she became a housekeeper in Detroit, before she scrubbed floors to keep him clothed, she had been a linguist. Fluent in 5 languages. Recruited by the State Department in the late 70s. Brilliant. Published. Until she wasn't. She was blacklisted in 1985, during a Cold War scandal involving false claims of espionage. A conservative task force alleged her linguistic studies were coded communications with foreign entities. She lost her fellowship, her papers disappeared from university archives, and her name became a ghost in academic circles. She had gone from decoding dialects for diplomats to cleaning office buildings owned by the same men who erased her. "I didn't tell you," she wrote, "because I didn't want you to grow up angry. I wanted you to grow up fluent, in strength, in silence, in legacy." The second page was a list. Names, mentors, resources, even an unfinished manuscript titled Linguistic Resistance: The Politics of Accent and Authority. Her work, buried for decades, still lived. Jamarcus sat for a long time, the letter trembling in his hands. His entire life he thought he had built language from scratch. In truth, he had inherited it from a mother forced into quiet brilliance. He realized then that his fluency wasn't just academic, it was ancestral. Every syllable he translated, every accent he protected, every dialect he celebrated, was a continuation of her fight. Language wasn't just power, it was lineage. A month later, he stood beneath the same university banner that once denied his mother re-entry after her blacklisting. His speech was short, but every word was deliberate. "I'm here today," he said, "to launch the Aaliyah Owen Scholarship, dedicated to Black polyglots, translators, and tech students who were told that brilliance needed permission." The auditorium roared. A former dean wept in the front row. Journalists captured every angle. The scholarship wasn't just about tuition. It included mentorship, mental health support, language preservation workshops, and a direct pipeline to Zetech internships. It became an incubator of rediscovery for culture, for genius, for legacy. Applications flooded in from Harlem to Johannesburg, from Atlanta to Accra. And every applicant was asked the same question: whose voice do you want the world to hear? As Zetech Commons evolved, so did its mission. Instead of expanding to dominate, Jamarcus shifted the model to distribute. Rather than own global language data, Zetech created regional cooperatives, small teams in Senegal, in Bangladesh, and the Philippines, who controlled their own platforms. Profits were split. Decisions made locally. For once, tech didn't mean extraction. It meant restoration. Preston Vale, meanwhile, faded into digital silence. Once the darling of Silicon Valley, he now scraped consulting contracts in private forums. No major company would take him publicly. The few firms that did had their social reputations shredded within hours. He was no longer dangerous, just forgettable. One photo surfaced online. Preston alone at a coffee shop, laptop open, looking over his shoulder like he was waiting for relevance to return. It never did. And then the world shifted again. At the close of a tech ethics panel in South Africa, a major news anchor interrupted the live stream feed with a breaking bulletin. "We have just received confirmation that Zetech Commons will expand into Africa, Asia, and the Middle East, partnering with local cooperatives to launch culturally specific, AI-powered education and translation hubs by next quarter." Jamarcus watched the clip play on a screen above a Nairobi cafe. His face projected against rolling subtitles in 3 languages. He took a sip of ginger tea, humbled but unshaken. This wasn't conquest. It was continuation. His phone buzzed with a private message from a Sudanese linguist. "Your mother's manuscript wasn't just theory. I think it held a code, not metaphorical. Real, hidden in the syntax. We need to decode it. Fast." The museum was quiet, hushed in the reverence reserved for tragedy and triumph. Jamarcus stood at the far end of the exhibit hall, just beyond a polished pane of glass. On the other side, spotlighted under a soft white beam, hung the janitor's uniform, pressed, preserved, untouched since the day he last wore it. The gray shirt still bore the faded patch. Owens, maintenance. Below it, etched into a black marble plaque, were 5 words that had echoed across continents. "The man who translated justice." Visitors passed by in respectful silence. School groups paused for photos. Some took notes. Others just stared. And yet none of them truly knew what it had cost. The plaque continued, in smaller script. Jamarcus Owens, language innovator, activist, and founder of Zetech Commons, began his career at Zetech sweeping floors. When a translator failed to appear at a critical summit, he stepped forward, fluent in Arabic, and unnoticed by the executives around him. What followed was a global reckoning of race, recognition, and stolen genius. He built not an app, but a movement. Some read. Some wept. A child asked his teacher, why didn't they just let him be the translator? The teacher's voice wavered. Because they didn't believe someone who looked like him could lead. But Jamarcus didn't linger long in front of the uniform. He wasn't one to live in glass boxes. Outside the museum, the day was warm and windless. Nairobi's skyline shimmered in the distance, a city now home to one of Zetech Common's most innovative regional hubs. He walked through its university district, unbothered by attention, but always watched. People knew who he was. But it wasn't celebrity he carried, it was significance. That afternoon he entered a sunlit classroom with whiteboards stained from constant use. Inside were students from 5 countries, all fluent in different tongues. A young woman coded in Quechua, beside a boy from Lagos translating pidgin AI interfaces. A deaf student was training Zetech's newest sign-based module. At the front, Jamarcus adjusted his glasses and raised a marker. Language, he wrote, is survival.
Then, underneath,
And so is memory. The scholarship program in his mother's name had now funded 1,200 students globally. Each one carried a fragment of her legacy forward, not as a ghost, but as a guide. Her lost manuscripts had been digitized and released as public domain. Linguists uncovered that her syntax models had embedded pattern recognition far ahead of her time, a system some now believed could revolutionize not just translation but how AI processed morality through linguistics. The Sudanese researcher who had contacted Jamarcus weeks earlier confirmed it. There was indeed a hidden pattern, a code that reacted to sentence structure, emotion, and historical context. It wasn't espionage. It was a linguistic moral compass. She hadn't been a threat. She had been the future. Jamarcus spent much of his time now listening more than speaking. He mentored. Yes. He advised global councils. He even sat in rooms where former world leaders deferred to his insights. But his greatest joy came from watching students write dialect trees across walls, or debate translation ethics in Swahili, or laugh over the glitchy humor of AI trying to replicate Caribbean patois. The boy who once swept floors now helped sweep away centuries of erasure. One evening, after guest lecturing at a tech justice conference in Cape Town, he took a walk alone. No guards, no entourage, just him and the night air. He wandered down quiet streets, lost in reflection, not of anger but of endurance. He thought of the janitor's closet where he once cried in silence. He thought of Preston Vale's smirk during those first boardroom insults. He thought of his mother, knees aching, after long shifts, still sitting beside him with Arabic flashcards she could barely afford to print. And yet, all of it had led here. Not to a podium, to a path. As he walked, he passed a community library. Its lights were dimming for the night, but one wing remained lit. He approached out of instinct more than curiosity. Inside stood a boy, maybe 10, wearing a gray janitor's uniform far too big for his frame. It hung off his shoulders like inherited armor. His name patch had come loose. He was staring up at a projection on the wall, a short documentary looping silently, showing Jamarcus at the congressional hearing, then the Saudi summit, then the walkout, then the museum. The boy turned as Jamarcus entered. His eyes widened, unsure if he was dreaming. "You're him," he whispered. Jamarcus didn't answer with certainty, only a smile. "Who do you think I am?" The boy pointed at the screen. "The guy who made the machine that talks like my grandma." Jamarcus laughed gently. "Then yeah, I guess that's me." The boy looked down at his oversized sleeves. "They said I should stop dressing like this. Said I should pick a real hero." Jamarcus knelt. "Don't let anyone tell you what a hero's supposed to wear," he said. "Some of the most powerful voices come wrapped in silence, until they're ready to be heard." The boy nodded. "I want to build things too. Stuff that helps. Stuff that remembers." "You will," Jamarcus said. "And when you do, make sure no one erases your name from the code." As they exited the library, the final shot of the documentary played behind them. A wide shot of the janitor's uniform hanging in its glass case, museum light casting long shadows. But the focus wasn't on the uniform. It was on the plaque beneath it. It read, "He just swept floors until he spoke truth to power. Sometimes the most powerful voices are the ones we're trained to ignore. But silence is not absence. It's preparation. And when brilliance finally speaks, it doesn't ask for permission. It builds the future. If you've ever been overlooked, silenced, told you didn't belong, this story was for you. No one should have to fight this hard. Just to be seen. Type yes if you believe in justice. Subscribe if this broke your heart.